Over the last few months, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have been on a tear, rising very rapidly to new all-time highs. Also, Robert Kiyosaki has just disclosed that he has added Bitcoin to his portfolio as a store of value. Today, I'm going to present the reasons he gives in support of cryptocurrencies, as well as the pros and cons of cryptocurrencies, so stay tuned. Hi everybody, welcome back to The Contrarian. My name is Logan. I really like to talk about overall success in investing, as well as going against crowd thinking mentality, so if you like these kinds of topics, just consider subscribing. Also want to make a brief disclaimer here that this is not to be taken as financial advice. So first I'll introduce you to Robert Kiyosaki. For those of you who don't know him, he is a famous author and investor, with his most notable book being the classic Rich Dad, Poor Dad. In this book, Robert lays out the fundamental differences between the rich and the poor, and why the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. Essentially, Kiyosaki argues that all comes down to mindset and strategy. So I definitely recommend reading this book. It's a great book. Also, he is a long-term gold and silver advocate. He's been advocating for gold and silver for the last few decades. He's been advocating that investors have some of these precious metals in their portfolios, and now he's saying that Bitcoin and potentially other cryptocurrencies could be in the same camp as precious metals. So I'll take a look into a recent Forbes article written earlier this year about Robert's thoughts on Bitcoin being a good store of value, similar to how gold and silver are. I think it's important, especially for old guys like me, to understand the crypto world, because that's the world that's coming into view right now, and us real estate and gold guys are being phased out. Kiyosaki told his radio listeners, later uploaded to YouTube. Rich Dad Poor Dad advocates the importance of financial literacy and became a New York Times bestseller, going on to sell around 40 million copies. There's this battle on today between old guys and young guys, Kiyosaki said, pointing to investors like Warren Buffett, known as the Oracle of Omaha, who are anti-crypto. As an old guy, it's taken me a while to get Bitcoin and crypto, but now I'm buying it, Kiyosaki said, adding that he did try to buy Bitcoin in late 2017 when the price was nearing $20,000, but didn't complete the deal. Kiyosaki's interest in Bitcoin was piqued earlier this year when Bitcoin went through a supply squeeze known as a halving, just as the US Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world were ramping up money printing to prop up economies ravaged by coronavirus-induced lockdowns. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are now challenging the hegemony of the US dollar and other fiat currencies, Kiyosaki wrote alongside the radio interview. So all of these are very good points that Robert lays out. Bitcoin is automatically created with a limited supply. It will be permanently capped with a supply of 21 million Bitcoins when it finally completes. And roughly every 4 years it goes through a halving event, where the number of Bitcoins produced every day is cut in half. And we just went through the third halving event earlier this year, around May in 2020. And this is the exact opposite of what the central banks and basically all central banks are doing right now, where they're printing fiat currencies, increasingly more and more. It's essentially like a exponential increase in the money supply right now. So this is a very powerful argument to make for Bitcoin as opposed to fiat currencies. And in this way, Bitcoin is very similar to precious metals. There's a limited supply of gold and silver that can be mined, and kind of like with Bitcoin, the more and more you mine of, say, gold and silver, the harder and harder it is to mine that remaining bit of gold and silver, and it's the same way with Bitcoin. And now this does come with some legendary investors being very skeptical of it. Most notably, Warren Buffett has called it worthless artificial gold. And while Buffett does have a vested interest in existing financial institutions continuing to exist, I don't think he's entirely talking in terms of his own wishful thinking. Just for example, Buffett is willing to have his mind changed about his views. Earlier this year he sold all of his airline stocks that he had, and he bought stock in a gold mining company. And previously he'd been very skeptical of gold, so he's very willing to have his mind changed. And he's definitely going to do what he thinks will play out best over the long term. And also joining Warren Buffett in skepticism of cryptocurrencies is another legendary investor, Jim Rogers, and he brings up issues with regards to governments just simply shutting them down. Last month, legendary investor Jim Rogers warned Bitcoin and similar virtual currencies beyond the influence of the government will not be allowed to survive. While it is true that Bitcoin doesn't rely on a government to exist, it could still be made illegal. And this is definitely a viable point to be made, is that governments have become increasingly tight and regulatory around cryptocurrencies, and they definitely could shut them down or try to shut them down completely if they saw them as seeking to overthrow the currencies the government wanted to issue, essentially. And I know a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts out there would like to say that there's no way the government can stop everyone, and that is correct. But Bitcoin is a distributed ledger, and that's one of its main advantages. But also a main disadvantage in this situation, if it were made illegal, the government, basically anyone can see this updated distributed ledger, and it can therefore be traced much more easily than even fiat currencies. So it could actually be easily shut down if the government wanted to, if they saw it as a serious threat. So this advantage of Bitcoin could also be its biggest weakness. And unfortunately for the Bitcoin enthusiasts, I would side with the skeptics on this issue, in that the governments definitely could shut down cryptocurrencies if they wanted to. If they wanted to issue their own cryptocurrencies, like Fed coin or something, they could shut down all these other cryptos and just issue, in place of the dollar, if the dollar were to be replaced with some sort of cryptocurrency, they could easily do that, in my opinion. So where am I going from here is just the bottom line. It's just a little too risky for me personally. I like to stick with the rule of, the higher the price of something goes, the greater the risk it has. That's a very fundamental rule of investing. So if Bitcoin were in its earlier stages, 5 or 6 years ago, where it was $10 a Bitcoin or however much it was back then, I would definitely be a lot more into it. I would probably be potentially buying some cryptocurrencies if it were much more, back in its infant stages and much more lower in price. Right now, I just see it as potentially being very inflated, just with all of the hype and noise that it's getting. So that's just my personal thoughts. Again, this is not financial advice. I just see it as potentially very risky, with governments wanting to intervene, wanting to get their own cryptocurrencies out there, or potentially just wanting to shut down all these other cryptocurrencies that are trying to get around fiat currencies. Also, what's preventing another Satoshi Nakamoto type figure from just issuing a new and better cryptocurrency and then that taking over where Bitcoin is right now? I just see it as kind of the Wild West right now, and there have been big winners. Like if you'd held Bitcoin for the last 10 years, you would have been a very big winner, but there have also been very big losers in this blockchain revolution that's happened so far. So I guess I'm just more willing to sit back on the sidelines and see where it goes right now. But these are just my thoughts, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. And yeah, just let me know what you guys think about Robert Kiyosaki and his thoughts about Bitcoin and how that relates with precious metals. And yeah, I hope to see you again.